Thank you very much, Justin, and it's a pleasure to be here in person. And it's also a pleasure to be here, I think for the first time I've given this talk in every year, to be reasonably optimistic, and certainly a huge amount more optimistic about the economic outlook than I was a year ago when COVID was really at its height. So when we've been talking a lot about letters for the economy.
I'm probably in the way, actually. Hold on, Chris. I'm going to go down here where I'm not. How's that?
That's perfect. We've been talking a lot about what sort of letter the economy is, and so far, at least, both here and in the US and in Europe, we're quite like a V. We're as much of a V-shaped recovery as we could hope for. But if anyone has been reading the newspapers this morning, been that old-fashioned, or looking at websites or on broadcast, you will have heard the new Health Secretary Sajid Javid say that we will be relaxing all restrictions on the 19th of July. We have to learn to live with the virus, and this is the way to improve the economy. Now, I think my message is going to be subtly different to that, and it is that the virus is crucial to our economic outlook, but it isn't necessarily a trade-off between healthy people and a healthy economy. You need to control the virus, and that's what has improved our economic outlook. It is vaccines and an ability to adapt. So inject and adapt, which has improved the outlook for the global economy. Just to show you how much it's improved since last autumn, here is a picture of the advanced economies. Now, before COVID, we thought that over 5 years from 2019, they would grow by about 8%. So advanced economies aren't growing particularly fast, but 8%. Then autumn last year, these IMF forecasts almost halved that. They said over those 5 years, growth would be about half, about 5%. But now the spring forecasts are much more optimistic, almost back to where we were, 7%. And if we had forecasts now, really up-to-date ones, they would be close to the pre-COVID forecast. So that shows just the improvement for advanced economies. Emerging economies, not quite the same. They grow much faster. They're catching up with advanced economies. 26% growth over the same period. Then there was a big drop down. This includes China, which has done very well with the virus, but also its outlook has improved a lot less. And it's a big gap. And actually, because vaccines and the virus is still spreading very, very severely around emerging economies, we're not seeing that big improvement. So there's a big gap in the world at the moment. Advanced economies looking a hell of a lot better than last autumn. Emerging economies, though they're still going to grow faster, not improving so much. Looking at the advanced economies, where the UK is, just look at where America is. America's growing fastest of all. It has already recovered the lost ground from the COVID crisis. UK and the Eurozone, pretty similar. UK was doing worse last year, but has caught up with the vaccine rollout program, and pretty similar at the moment. And we're about 2.5% below the pre-COVID level at the moment, and will, so long as nothing goes wrong, reach that level over the summer sometime. Why are things going well? Well, I think 4 reasons. One is huge fiscal support. So everywhere in advanced economies, countries have said, we're not worried about deficits. We just have to protect people, protect jobs, and get the economies back into the situation that they can grow and succeed again after the crisis. And that has worked. The top left thing shows just the scale of the public finance support that the UK has offered. Same for every other country, biggest in peacetime deficit ever. Vaccines is the big get-out-of-jail-free card that we got in the autumn last year, and that has improved confidence and allowed us to think that there was a way out of this virus. Just imagine if we had the Delta variant and no vaccines, and we're having to shield really heavily like India had to just a few months ago. Central banks themselves have also facilitated the borrowing from government by keeping interest rates exceptionally low and printing enough money that we don't have to worry about that side of things till now. That's something for a few years' time. And unlike last year, consumers are happy to spend. There is every sign that people are willing to go out shopping, wanting to spend money. as long as they're allowed to do so. So we're not going to see things like Eat Out to Help Out this year, where people were very scared to go out this time last year. There's no concern at the moment about consumers' appetite for spending. So much so that, in fact, the new concern is that we might be actually spending too much money, more than the economies can handle, and we might be, after 30 years where we've seen inflation come down and down and down, we might be moving into a more inflationary era. Now, we want a bit of this. We want to run our economies as hot as we possibly can, and there are concerns, particularly in the US, that with the blue line on the right there, that expectations of future inflation are now really quite high, that maybe we might be running too fast. This is something that we'll come back to. We're certainly going to see inflation rise quite high in the US and the UK this year. The question which everyone has to grapple with is it temporary or is it going to be persistent? But let's focus in on the UK a little bit more. So look at these charts. This is how much the economy lost on a month-by-month basis during the COVID crisis. You can see there the blue bars in April 2020 down 25%. And the red bars there are manufacturing, which did worse in the heat of the crisis, but then was what the biggest form of recovery last autumn, and was doing better than the economy as a whole in the winter and still now. So in April this year, manufacturing was only a couple of percent below the pre-crisis level. So that's the story worldwide. In fact, manufacturing is often above the pre-crisis level in many other advanced countries, which says something a little bit about Brexit, which I'm going to come back to. But look at automotive. We know that there's a semiconductor issue. We know that the crisis hit the automotive sector even harder than manufacturing as a whole in the teeth of it last spring. It made a very good recovery in the autumn. But with the semiconductor crisis, it's had a very difficult 2021. It's now 20% still below in output the level of the pre-crisis period. Part of that is semiconductors. Part of it is Brexit. How much of it is Brexit? Well, we don't know. And part of the reason we don't know is because the statistics are all over the place at the moment. If you look at on the red bars at UK exports and imports to the EU, this is the UK statistics, and they say it's not gone too badly, 5% down in April compared with December. But if you look at the same statistics, but from the Eurozone, they say it's 24% down. And when we've been trying to look at how on earth do you reconcile these two things, these should be the same. We never get gaps like this, and it's all to do with different measurements since the new trading relationships have come in. And this is something actually for the SMMT, I think, to look at, because I was talking to the ONS only last week, and they said the biggest source of this discrepancy is in the automotive sector. So you can certainly help try and resolve whether things are okay or things are really rather serious on the trading front. But it's not just trade where Brexit is going to have an impact. It's also in skills. And we know that we're not seeing most of the impact on skills and people yet, because COVID's swamping and is much more important than any Brexit effect. But where we have been opening up rather rapidly this spring, we are seeing vacancies soar, shortages in labour around, and that is potentially a big problem for the economy. So what risks are we going to see? What are the big risks in the years ahead? Still lasting economic scars. We're not as worried about those as we were, but there are industries like travel, which are not going to get back to normal. And so how big those are, completely unknown, but very important for things like the public finances, how much austerity might or might not be needed in future. Inflation, but then the most important thing, and I'm going to come back to that, is the virus. If we control the virus, the signs for the economy are looking bright. If we get variants that are resistant to vaccines, things will look a lot more serious. So it's been delightful to be able to be here and say, actually this time the economic situation looks much more positive than it did a year ago and even in last autumn, but there's still big risks ahead. And automotive is certainly at the centre of things, and particularly at the centre of the Brexit debate and the uncertainties of how that is affecting the economy and how it will move forward in the months ahead. Thank you very much.
Chris, thank you very much. Now, yes, a round of applause for Chris. Does anyone have anything they want to ask Chris now? You've not been massively questioning, which is no bad thing, because everyone has been completely self-contained and explained among themselves. But if there's anyone in the audience that wants to ask something, then you're very welcome to. Can I ask, Chris, a sort of an expectations? You mentioned inflation, you mentioned expectation of inflation. Is there a risk that we kind of talk ourselves into it?
There's a definitive risk we talk ourselves into it. If we start, the key problem about inflation is if we think it's going to happen, and then we will demand much more pay, and then companies say, well, okay, we'll have to pay our workers a bit more, but let's put our prices up a bit just to cover that, and you get into a ratchet effect. And so it's all about, we know we're going to have an inflationary period. There's really big supply chain bottlenecks, big increases in commodity prices around the world. So that will push inflation up. So the question is this a temporary period? Is it just for this year, things get back under control next year? Or does it then move into wages, expectations, prices, and you get a bit of a spiral? No one's talking about the 1970s, but we might be talking about sort of inflation in the 4-5s rather than in the 2s where the targets are. More so, we always look at the US. The US is ahead of the game here. It's where the inflationary pressures are greatest at the moment.
And when you look at the US and you look at the behaviour of the Fed, and then at other central banks, including our own, who have the kind of rules set for them that they're trying to follow, how accommodative will they be, do you think? What attitude are they going to take to the short-term spike?
They're going to take a very relaxed attitude, as relaxed as they can be, because they don't want to get into the last decade of trying to clamp things down, turn off the party before economies have recovered. So frankly, they're going to take a few risks with inflation. They're going to think, particularly the Fed is thinking, it's not so bad if we have a period of higher inflation. We can always clamp down on that if it gets that bad. And we don't think it is. We think it's temporary. And there's always a niggle. They've become to wait. They wavered a bit in the last month or so in their last meeting, but they're still sticking to the idea that they really, really want to see the economies are fully recovered before they start to normalise.
And if we do get a bit of inflation, then bringing it back to the car industry, the automotive industry, what does it do to decision making about whether you buy a big thing like a car?
Well, for consumers, it normally will make you more likely to buy. You think, I better buy now before prices go up. So if there's an expectation that prices are going to rise, that tends to make people act sooner. For companies, it's very difficult because one of the real benefits of stable inflation over the last 20 or 30 years is that you don't have to worry about prices changing. You don't have to worry that suddenly your profit margins are going to go through the floor if your costs go up or your labour costs go up, but you can't raise prices. So it's a very difficult, delicate balancing act.
Yeah. Chris, always a pleasure and real pleasure face to face. Chris Giles from the FT. Round of applause.